Stacey is going to give us another verse of the Beautiful May Carol, I think.
So this is the third verse of this Welsh May Carol, and it says, "The earth is full of fruits and treasures, enough to feed all of us. And if we have peace, we can all love with the same heart and have enough together." Mae'r ddaear fawr ffrwython a'i thrysor yn ddigon I borthu trigolion yn dirion bob dydd. Pe byddem ni ddynion mewn cyflo heddychlon yn caru ni'n galon ein gilydd.
Magical again. Such a beautiful carol. And Stacey has got another beautiful story for us, which she's going to do in Welsh and English.
Cyfoedd nid yw ond o feryg, glendid nid yw yn parhau, ond cariad pur sydd fel y dydd yn para tra bod Roedd yn 3 diwrnod cyn Nadolig. Oedd yn oer ac oedd y coedwig yn dywyll. It was 3 days before Christmas. The snow was thick, the forest was black, and the air was chill, and there were footsteps in the snow, leading in between the trees. Ac roedd y marciau trad yn dod o hen fenyw. These footsteps belonged to an old lady, a very thin old lady with many layers and short sticking up hair and a thick rope belt around her waist. And she was very clever because her village for the 3rd time had been filled with soldiers, and her village for the 3rd time had been razed to the ground, and everybody was frightened and everybody didn't know what to do, but she had grown up there and she knew the secret ways back to the forest. And so she walked, trying to be as dark as the trees and as light as the snow. A fydd neb yn dilyn hi, so nobody could follow her. And she succeeded. And she walked, and she walked, and she walked, and she found an old shepherd's hut in the middle of the forest. Ac roedd yr hen adeilad yn hen iawn, a nath hi gwthio y drws a cerdded mewn. And as she walked in, she saw a shadow in the corner, and the moonlight fell down through the broken glass and showed the shape of somebody in this shepherd's hut. "Paid â poeni, cariad," she heard a voice. "Don't worry, lovely. Dwi ddim yn mynd I dy brifo ti. I'm not going to hurt you." And so she walked in, and she closed the door behind her, and she could see as her eyes adjusted to the dark that it was a very old, thin, old man. And like her, his hair was sticking up, he was very bony, and he had many layers and a thick rope belt around his waist. And his thin little legs poked out, and they were in big boots at the end. And there they were together in a shepherd's hut in the night, a couple of nights before Christmas. Nath hi edrych lawr ar y hen dyn, a wedodd hi, "Gai eista?" "Yes, sit down," he said. "Come and sit with me." And so she sat next door to him, and they sat quietly for a while. And she closed her eyes and she wished she was a little girl again, and she wished things were normal again, and she wished she was by the fire listening to her granny's stories. She wished the soldiers weren't in her village. She wished she hadn't had to walk through the snow in shoes that let the cold in. And she said, "Ga I gweud stori I ti? Can I share a story with you?" "Oh, bydd hwn yn hyfryd." He said, "I'd love that." And it made him feel warm, like they could pretend things were normal again. And so she began. Cyfoeth nid yw ond y feryl, glendid nid yw yn parhau. She said, when my granny was a young woman, she lived in a village not far from here. And her village too had been overrun by soldiers. And 3 times they'd come, and 3 times they'd destroyed the land. Nathon nhw strwytho y tir, strwytho y pobl, a strwytho calon y ddinas. They broke the earth, they broke the forest, and they broke the hearts of the people. But they'd left now, and life was just beginning to come back. The tiny shoots of plants were beginning to come back. People were beginning to farm again. People were very, very slowly starting to make life normal again. In this village were 2 young, beautiful people. A young, beautiful girl and a young, lovely man. And they loved each other very much. And they were very, very poor, but they each had a thing that was precious. She had gorgeous black hair. Nath e cwmpo dros y sgwydder fel y denydd y bran. It shone like a crow's wing, her beautiful long black hair. And her lovely man had a very special watch that belonged to his grandfather. Ac oedd e'n dal yr oriawr yn ei llaw. Pan rhywun yn gweud, "Faint y gloch yw e?" wedodd e, "1 gloch." If anyone asked what time it was, he'd open his hand and show them his grandfather's watch and proudly say, "It's 1 o'clock," or whatever time it was. So it's a few days before Christmas, and the young man and the young girl, young lady, really want to give each other a present, but they're very, very poor. And even though things are beginning to come back to normal after the war, roedden nhw'n dlawd iawn iawn. They were so, so poor. And the young girl sat at her table in her little house one morning after her lovely man had gone out, and she was thinking what to do. And her heart was so full of love when she thought, I've got nothing, I've got no money. And hot, fat, salt tears rolled down her cheeks. Then she had an idea. Dried her face, left the door, went through the door, walked down the street, and walked up to the house of an old lady who, before the war, had used to make wigs. She knocks on the door, and the old lady opens it. "Dewch I mewn? Chi eisiau werthu dy wallt?" "Come in," she said. "I guess you want to sell your hair." "Ydw, os gwelwch yn dda," said the girl, and she sat down. And she sat straight with her back rigid because she didn't really want to be there, but she was there. And as she sat straight, she heard the old lady shuffling around in drawers and pulling out some huge scissors. And she stood behind her and lifted up her black hair, gwallt hir, trwchus, du. And she gyda 3 ohonyn nhw, a gwallt yn cwmpo lawr i'r llawr. 3 snips, and those black waves fell and landed on the floor. And the girl looked. And then the girl held out her hand and said, "Arian os gwelwch yn dda, pay me please." She took the money, she kept it close in her coat, she walked down the street, and she came to a shop where she had seen a silver watch chain. She knocked on the door and she went in. "Ga I prynu hwn os gwelwch yn dda? Fi moyn e I fy nghariad I Nadolig. I'll buy that please for Christmas for my love." So she hands over the money from her hair, and she holds the beautiful silver chain safe in her coat and wraps it close, and off she goes home. While this is happening, the young man is thinking the same thing, and he's racking his brains about what to give to his love at Christmas time. Yr unig peth sy gyda fi yw oriawr tad ci. Na I werthu fe. And he takes his watch and he goes to the jewellery shop. And the jewellery shop had two very sweet, very fine silver combs in the front window. Aeth e mewn, roedd e'r oriawr. And the man said, would you like to sell your watch? And he said, yes, please. I want those two silver combs in the window, please. So he picks up the combs, he gives his watch over, and he holds them tight in his coat, and he walks home. Cyfoeth nid yw ond o feryl, glendid nid yw yn parhau, ond cariad pryd. And he arrives home, and she's already sitting there the other side of the table. She's one side, and he's the other. And he looks up and he sees her hair, and he has to take a breath because it's gone. And she sees the shock in his eyes, and she says, paid y poeni, fi wedi torri fe, fydd yn tyfu nôl, it'll grow back, don't worry. I spent the money on something good. And so they sit opposite each other, and she holds her hands out, and she says, Nadolig llawen cariad, Merry Christmas. And in her hands is a beautiful silver chain. And he holds his hands out and says, Nadolig llawen cariad. And in his hands are the two beautiful silver combs. And he says, I bought the combs for you, for your hair, but your hair's gone. And she says, I bought the silver watch chain for you, but you've sold your watch. And they laugh. And then they're quiet. And they hold hands across the table, leaving the gifts either side. And they stay there for a little while. And they realise what they hold in their hands is so much more precious than the gifts they thought they needed to give. Cyfoeth nid yw ond feryl, glendid nid yw yn parhau, ond cariad pur sydd fel y dydd yn para trabol. That's the end of the story, said the old lady as she sat in the shepherd's hut with the old man. The old man was lost in her voice. He'd forgotten he was sitting in an old shed, cold, at the end of a war, with no food and not proper shoes. And they both looked up for a minute, and they both remembered it was Christmas soon. And she said, Fi eisiau roi rhywbeth I ti. I want to give you something. Fi'n roi y ser wrth yr awyr. I give you the stars in the sky tonight for Christmas. And the old man looked up and he said, Fi eisiau roi y lleiad I ti. I'd like to give you the moon for Christmas. And the old lady went quiet because she didn't want to be outdone. She was a smart old lady. She said, I'm going to give you something better than the moon. I give you this story. Look after it and treasure it. Mae hon y gar fy nghalon I, ymhell oddi yma'n byw, a hiraeth am ei gweled I, yn neud yn llwyd fawr.
you so much, Stacey, and for such a lovely, heartwarming story. Gets me every time. And thank you so much to everybody for coming and listening. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your stories over your weekend. And these stories were our gifts to you.